Hi, I'm John F. Gately. Welcome back to the show. So the Department of Justice earlier this week has indicted, let me get this straight, members of the African People's Socialist Party in the Uhuru movement, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't know exactly. But these people are far leftist. They're basically communists. And they seem to have been indicted for exercising their First Amendment rights. You might remember that within the last month, the federal government also convicted Douglas Mackey for exercising his First Amendment right for posting memes during the 2016 election. This is so fundamentally wrong because the federal government seems to be prosecuting people when they speak things that the federal government doesn't like. Let's have Tucker Carlson explain.
Well, as you've just heard, the Biden administration spends an awful lot of time covering up actual crimes committed by their political allies and their relatives. But for their critics, there is no such mercy. For the first time in our history, the government has begun to arrest people for saying things the White House doesn't like. That's the end of the First Amendment. Speech that's been protected for centuries in the United States is no longer protected. It's now a criminal act. We've told you about the grotesquely unconstitutional prosecution and then conviction of Douglas Mackey. The DOJ is trying to send Mackey to prison for a decade for making fun of Hillary Clinton's voters on Twitter. The media barely report the story. They don't seem to care at all. They seem to endorse it. No one in Congress has meaningfully pushed back against it. So this trend continues. The latest group of Americans to find their constitutionally protected opinions become felonies are, believe it or not, an organization of black nationalist left-wingers who oppose the war in Ukraine.
I'm not even sure if it's fair to call them left-wingers. They're even beyond. They're around the bend, let me just say. I mean, I have nothing in common with maybe one thing, and that incredibly skeptical of the U.S. involvement in the Ukrainian war. But other than that, nothing in common with these people.
The DOJ has just charged many in this group with seeking to, quote, sow discord, spread pro-Russia propaganda, and interfere in elections within the United States.
Well, wait a second. I thought as a U.S. citizen, if you wanted to sow discord, you could do that. I thought as a U.S. citizen, if you wanted to spread pro-Russian information, you could do that. I thought as a U.S. citizen, if you wanted to interfere, in other words, participate in an election, you could do that. I thought that was part of your First Amendment rights.
Now, there's no evidence they interfered with any election. You're allowed to be pro-Russia. You're allowed to be pro anything you want in the United States. Saying things the government doesn't like, having unfashionable opinions or opinions that are out of step with Joe Biden's opinions, that is not a crime. You can spread pro-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can spread anti-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can say whatever you want, but not anymore. According to the indictment, the criminals in question, quote, wrote articles that contained Russian propaganda and disinformation. Huh? They also gave speeches and posted videos that annoyed the State Department. Here's one of them.
There's a discussion about Russian military border buildup on its border with Ukraine and how this represents a terrible threat to Ukraine by Russians. But there is no acknowledgement of the history that took us to this place, how the U.S. overthrew, participated in facilitating the overthrow of a government in Ukraine that was friendly to the Soviet Union, nor does it talk about the history of this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. This is an ongoing aggression. It did not just start. It's been going on for a while, but the U.S. government relies on the ignorance of the people in this country and much of the world that's facilitated by people like Zuckerberg.
So for whatever it's worth, we're not really sure who that guy is. We know he's American. Pretty sure that on a lot of
he is actually the leader of the party, so to speak. So he's the one that's in the biggest trouble, it seems, amongst the Americans that have been indicted. Now, to be clear, there are a group of Russians that have been indicted, and now in the superseding indictment, a group of Americans that have been indicted. in my take, if you want to indict the Russians, because effectively they are foreign agents, they're Russian nationals interfering with the United States elections, it seems totally legitimate to prosecute, I should say, and indict and jail the Russian nationals who are involved with interfering our elections. If that is the case, if they can prove that in court, it seems fine to me if you want to charge the Russian nationals, but not the U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens have an inalienable right that comes not from the government, but comes from above. It's a God-given right to the First Amendment. That's the fundamental aspect. That's why it is the First Amendment to be an American. You have that right. Now, there are some certain limitations relative to public safety, as we all know. But other than that, you have the right to say whatever you want.
Issues we likely would not agree with him. A lot of what he just said in that video seems to be true. But even if it weren't true, even if he was wrong, it would still be constitutionally protected speech. In a free country, which we had until recently, you are allowed by definition to have dumb opinions. Most of us do, but not anymore.
And of course, the fundamental court case on this is the Skokie case, where the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, defended the rights of the Nazis, or the Nazi Party, as abhorrent of those views are. The Nazi Party's abhorrent, awful views. But the ACLU defended their right to march in Skokie so that everybody had the right to say what they wanted. Of course, nowadays, if that Skokie case came along today, the ACLU, I'm just guessing, probably would not have taken the same position they took decades ago. Because if one party doesn't have the right to free speech, then everyone's. In fact, it's more important to defend the unpopular speech. It's most important to defend the unpopular speech. That's, if you don't defend the unpopular speech, then who really has First Amendment right? Nobody.
So that man you just saw is facing 10 years behind bars for expressing views about Ukraine that the Biden administration doesn't want to hear. That's terrifying. Does no one else think that's terrifying? It is terrifying. And to that man's credit, whoever he is, he saw it coming. Here he is at a rally last month.
They have declared that black people are so stupid that it takes Russians to tell us that we are oppressed. I have never known a moment of black freedom for my entire life. I have never read of a moment since the beginning of a colonial mode of production where black people have been free. And yet they're saying that we are agents of some foreign power because we say black people must be free.
Okay, again, we're not defending that guy because we agree with all of his views. We probably don't. That is totally irrelevant. Whether you agree with what someone is saying has nothing to do with his right to say it. Americans are allowed to say what they think is true, period.
All right, excellent, Tucker. And just for kicks, I went through the indictment for you because I was, curious to say what type of involvement did they actually have with these Russian agents. Now, at first, they were just the Russians indicted, and now, as of, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, the American citizens have been indicted. Now, don't worry, we're not going to go through this entire indictment. It is about 35 pages, but I did quickly go through it, and over approximately a 7-year period, I found, allegedly, 3 transactions, financial transactions, totaling approximately $5,200. Yeah, that's not a lot of money over 7 years, but I'll let their lawyers argue that point beyond this. I think what's more important here is the rigorous defense of the First Amendment. Let's have Glenn Beck, speaking to Glenn Greenwald, explain.
Actually a chance for the constitutionalist right to actually stand up and make this an issue because we have nothing in common with these people. And I don't want anyone silenced, anyone. And this is a chance for us to stand up and do what the press will never do for somebody on the right. They should have stood up with Alex Jones and said, we don't like the guy. We don't like the guy. But he has a right to say what he's going to say. The same thing we should be now doing on this side, because it'll just confuse the hell out of them, and it will show that we actually have principles behind what we say.
You have to have principles behind what you say. Otherwise, what it seems like you're saying is just kind of a special pleading for your own allies. And I'm really...
That's exactly right on Glenn Greenwald's. But if you only defend the First Amendment for people you agree with, then it's just a special pleading. In other words, you don't care about the First Amendment. You just care about your free speech, nobody else's. When you only care about your free speech, then it's just a matter of time before your free speech is lost.
Glad to hear that, because as you know, as well as anybody, Glenn, it is very common for people on the right to be accused of being Russian agents. That is probably the go-to accusation by establishment liberals and kind of the never-Trump wing of the Republican Party that accuses everybody who disagrees with them of being a Kremlin agent.
Like, I even hear that in my comments. I have less than 1,000 subscribers, whom I love. I love you, but I get that in the comments, like, you're a Putin lover. Oh, my God, really? I hate Putin. I don't like what they're doing in Ukraine, but I also don't like what the United States is doing. That doesn't make me a Putin lover.
Serving the Russian government, and if you now let the Biden Justice Department expand what that means and allow them to turn you into a felon, not just ruin your reputation or ban you from social media, but prosecute you criminally under federal law, that is an extremely dangerous precedent, including for lots of people who have different ideologies than these defendants.
Exactly. So excellent summary by Glenn Greenwald there. You couldn't see his face, but that was him, Glenn Greenwald. Once again, if you cannot speak what you want to say politically, then is this really a free country? Or is it more like, I don't know, Canada, eh? I think this is astounding to become more like Canada, eh? Right? Sorry, bad Doug and Bob. I just watched a Doug and Bob McKenzie video yesterday, so forgive me. Yeah, that was awful. But it's becoming more like that, where you can only speak if they agree with you. All right, so from America's hometown, Plymouth, I'm John F. Gately in Massachusetts. Have a great day.